for joining us today. We are joined today by Abigail Hughes. Abby, could you please introduce yourself and let us know where you're from?
Sure. I'm Abigail Hughes, the liaison officer from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science in the San Francisco office. We also have a Washington, D.C. office, but Japan Society for the Promotion of Science is the largest funding agency for academic research in Japan. And what we love to do is to provide fellowships for people who want to conduct their own personal research in any field. We're interdisciplinary, in any field in Japan. So first they find a host researcher. Well, first we tell them about it, and then they find a host researcher in Japan who's doing something similar to what they're doing. And then they jointly apply to a JSPS fellowship.
And what is the range of topics that one can apply to? So you said interdisciplinary. What are the institutes in Japan that I guess are affiliated, and what is the science that one can do?
Right. So it is for any field of research, any possible science. As long as someone else is doing it, then you obviously you'll want to study with or conduct your research with somebody who is doing what you want to do, right? So almost any, you would be hard pressed to find an institution that can't host you. JSPS is well known. It's like the NIH of the US. But so if you find a host researcher at Kyoto University, of course you can study there. If you find a host researcher at Osaka University, of course you can study there. And you can also study at not universities, but research institutes as well.
That's really cool. So as a student, do you have to find a potential host, or is there a matchmaking service, or how would one go about it? If I'm a student, I'm interested in doing research in Japan through this fellowship or opportunity, what is my starting point? What do I do?
Right, so that's a great question, and we get a lot of that because finding a host researcher is the most important part of the whole experience. But we have different websites that might be helpful. Definitely, as you conduct your research, I'm assuming you're already doing research now. So you can look up papers written by Japanese researchers. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention is that the host researcher doesn't need to be Japanese. They just need to be in Japan and associated with the host institution there. Pardon me. So if, say I'm a professor in Japan currently, I'm not. But imagine I was, and someone wants to conduct research with me, then that's fine if I'm associated with an institution in Japan.
And just a naive question, do you have to be able to speak Japanese or English?
No,
okay.
No, not at all. I understand can be a worry for some people, but in institutions and labs, they generally speak a lot of English. So you'll be quite comfortable. I mean, you might want to learn how to say, where's the bathroom? Or something like that, so you're not on the street like, please, I need a toilet. So you can find we have a few different, there's one called JSPS Net, and there's JSPS Alumni Fellows. There have been lots of people over the years who've received JSPS fellowships, and so they'll also be able to help you out. And if you go to our website, which is jsps.go.jp, you might want to put it into English, but if you look up JSPS on Google, you'll find us. And when you look us up, you can find other people who have received JSPS fellowships, and it'll also say who their host researcher was when they went. So you can even reach out to them if you'd like.
So would you encourage folks who are interested in this maybe to reach out to one of these members of the alumni list or associated labs to kind of get their experience and see if it's a right match for them? Like what process would you suggest for a student who's interested in it but isn't sure is a good fit? What's the best way of getting information about it?
Right, for sure. So definitely we have alumni who have talked about JSPS fellowships. You can also tune in. If you follow us on social media, I normally post when we are having a information session, and we generally have those online. And
so is that like a live session where folks can interact, ask questions?
Yes, absolutely, cool. Just like this. So they can come on and ask us, and I generally speaking have an alumni collaborator who's there just to speak about their experience.
And that's something that just, if we'll link the socials in post, but is that's something that's publicly available. Like, you don't have to necessarily be at a particular university to access it. You could just be like maybe starting in graduate school and you're just curious.
Right.
You can go to these meetings.
Yeah, so sometimes we're associated with specific universities, but we are considering going more public and just opening them up to all people. But generally speaking, if we are associated with a university, it is open to all.
Very cool. So can you go a little bit into what exactly the different kinds of fellowships are and who they're geared towards? So, you know, is it something where if I'm a citizen scientist, can I apply, or do I need to be a particular career stage? And what are the different types and benefits of each of these types of fellowships?
That's a perfect question. So starting off, we have the summer program, which is for graduate students, and also postdocs. So people in the graduate school sphere or have just finished and have received their postdoc. So when I say postdoc, I mean up to 6 years after receiving your PhD, right? So PhD, 6 years later, okay, you're no longer eligible for our postdoc fellowships. So we have the summer program, then we have what we call short term. Summer program is from just 2 months in the summer, and you find, and there's kind of like a cohort, and you all meet together in the beginning, and then you split off to go to do your own research by yourself, and then you come back at the end and kind of do presentations, and I've heard it's really fun. So we just started that back up last year after a 7-year hiatus. So we're really excited about that. There are about 80 slots per year worldwide for that, and we do it every year. Then the next is short-term postdoc, and that is from 1 to 12 months, and you can choose for however long you'd like to be in there, for 3 months or 9 months or 12 months, you can decide. And those are multiples of 3, but it doesn't have to be a multiple of 3, of course. So those are for people who are conducting research here. So if I'm not a US citizen, I am, but imagine I'm not, and I've been studying in the US, say at like Stanford, for 3 years, then I would be eligible. So the eligibility is for the US, Canada, UK, and EU, and a few more countries that I can't name off the top of my head. So you do receive more funding, like a little bit of a higher stipend if you have already received your PhD. It just makes sense. But if you haven't, that's okay too. You can still receive funding. If you haven't graduated yet, you are able to apply if you know and can get confirmation that within 2 years you will be receiving your PhD. So after short-term program, we have our standard program, which is from 1 to 2 years. And so you can choose for, I want to be there for 1 year and 5 months, for example. And this is for postdocs mostly. So for people who have already received their PhD and are looking to do something, it's kind of like a postdoc position. And the eligibility is open to all countries now. Then after you've hit 6 years, you're no longer a postdoc with us, unfortunately, but you're eligible for invitational fellowships. And those are for more experienced researchers, associate professors, full professors, assistant professors, and this is either short-term or long-term. Short-term is 14 to 60 days. Maybe you have a couple of conferences that you want to go to, so we'll fund you to do that. And then you can do long-term, which is 2 to 10 months. So that's kind of more along the lines of maybe a semester where you might teach, give symposiums and stuff like that. And those are, I don't think you need to be, as long as you're at the equivalent of an associate professor or something like that, I don't think you can probably be a citizen scientist if you're associated with an organization.
You mentioned that that's an invitation only, so that's something you cannot apply for?
No, it's called the Invitational
Gotcha.
Fellowship, but you're able to apply. It's open recruitment only. Which leads me into another point. There are open recruitment types where you connect with a host researcher in Japan and then apply to JSPS headquarters together. And then there's also the nominating authority. For example, we have a connection with NIH and we give them 5 slots every year for people who are, more science related.
So with respect to that connection, if it's through the NIH, do you have to communicate with JSPS offices, or is that directly through the NIH and then you end up being the sponsor essentially of that research? Like how does that interaction work?
Right, so that's a great question. So basically with the NIH fellowships, you are, you make your host, you meet a host researcher, right? As you would with the open recruitment type, you know, send them a nice little email and say, please, I want to study with you or conduct research with you, please let me do that. And then after you've connected with them, you both apply together via NIH's application form, which might just be JSPS's application form in their own words. And then moving forward, after you've submitted it, you let it go. It's no longer your responsibility. They basically take the hard work of choosing who they want out of it for us. And so then they say, these are the 5 people that we think are the best fit. What do you think? And then JSPS gives the funding.
And I guess the difference between that and the other funding opportunities is that you have to do the individual reviews for the other components.
Right, and so it's not me, but yes, someone at JSPS headquarters, which is in Tokyo, will look over all of the applications through open recruitment. Basically, there's more, NIH functions as a funnel for us. And so they say, these are all the applications we got, but we've only chosen these 5. What do you think of these 5? JSPS. And then JSPS says, that's a good choice. Here's money.
That's a nice interaction there between the different funding agencies, and then you have the independent component as well.
Yeah.
We have a question from the chat as well about citizenship requirements. So
okay.
you mentioned that international students, like this is an all over the world organization. I noticed that there's headquarters across the world.
Yeah.
When applying, what are the citizenship requirements in order to be able to do this research in Japan?
Right, so like I said before, for short term, so summer program is specifically for because the nominating authority is here in the US, so there is also one, I think, in France, and they have specific nominating authorities, so please be sure, if you go to our website, you can see all the liaison offices across the world. But if, for example, for JSPS USA postdocs, you have to be a US citizen. It's not quite set up like that. You don't have to say it's not USA, but there will be JSPS postdoc fellowships. And the requirements for that is that you're a citizen or you've been studying here for 3 years. So once you've hit 3 years of studying here, say you're a postdoc and you've conducted your PhD here, then you're eligible for a JSPS fellowship. And then after you've, like for standard invitational, it's from all countries. So your citizenship eligibility doesn't matter as much anymore.
Gotcha. And then so if the rules for, let's say, in France, if I was an immigrant from going into France, and there would be maybe a different number of years required as a student before applying, and those are just specific to the country, so you look it up online on your website to see.
Probably something like that, but I imagine that if you're a citizen of France, then you will be eligible. Like, for example, if you're immigrating there and you got your citizenship, I don't know how long it takes.
Or if you don't, maybe you'll check the website,
yeah,
like
for
you're
sure.
saying, and there's the requirements on there. So it's really nicely spelled out then.
Yeah, for sure. And we always get a lot of questions about eligibility and visas and sort of thing. And I should say that the visa is handled by the host institution once you've received your funding.
And that's the host institution in Japan, not
Yes.
from where you're coming from.
Yes.
How do the two universities interact, or is there really much interaction that needs to be done? For example, if I'm in the U.S. at a university and I'm applying for a JSPS fellowship and I get it, does there need to be a certain amount of communication to the university, or is it just kind of you go to Japan for that X number of time, then you just come back and it's a pretty easy interaction to
I've understood it as it is pretty easy to transition between the two, but once you've received your fellowship, the host university kind of takes over communications, so the host university in Japan. So they are communicating with you about, okay, we're going to house you here, and this is the stipend that JSPS has given you, and this is the research fund that JSPS is giving you as well. And they kind of work in hand, the host researcher and JSPS and the host university all work together to make a very comfortable experience for you. And then I believe that you just have to let your university know that you're going.
Cool. You mentioned the funding that JSPS gives a little bit, like you just mentioned housing and the research. Could you break down what the different types of funding that you get as one of these fellowships? Like,
Sure.
Do I need to get housing myself and pay for it? Do I need to provide for certain experiments? Like, what is a little bit of the breakdown that the student will be able to get?
Right, for sure. That's a great question as well. You're really good at this. So basically, JSPS provides a living stipend and also airfare and research stipend. And if you need more research stipend, your host researcher can apply for that as well. So basically, the host university will, I imagine most university, if it's a university, have housing for international students. So I'm sure they'd be able to put you up somewhere like that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm sure that, and once you've gotten to that point in the application process, it's time to talk with them about, hey, where would I be living? But definitely round trip out airfare. So the entire flight is paid for, and then, which is kind of one of the hardest parts about getting to Japan, am I right? It's so pricey.
It's a long flight.
It's a long flight and it's pricey. So you receive a living stipend to be able to conduct your research comfortably in Japan while you're there. So.
And that's regardless of the short term or the longer term fellowship that you might get.
So the amount of living stipend is slightly increased once you've received your PhD. And then, so airfare, living stipend, and then research stipend for the specific experiments that you might need to do, any equipment that you might need to purchase for that duration of time. And then also, if you're there for longer than 3 months, there's a sort of settling in a little allowance, so to make the transition more smooth. If you're there for less than 3 months, you don't receive that amount of money.
It's really cool. It sounds like there's a lot of thought put into the students that are coming to visit. You know, essentially you're visiting scientists, and it's nice to hear so much put into their mental health and their care as well, like these transitional times and accounting for living. Because all the stress coming to a new country, and it's really nice to hear how JSPS is facilitating that to be easier on the student. One question I have for you is that there's 10 unique offices right around the world that JSPS runs. You're in the San Francisco office. What do these offices do? What is your day-to-day like, and what is the goal and mission of each of these offices in communicating to the headquarters in Tokyo?
Oh, that's perfect. That's a great question. So I can speak from experience about JSPS San Francisco, but each office focuses on different things. We actually have a Washington, D.C. office, and they focus on policy, and they do more policy, and they also run the summer program. So if you're interested in applying to JSPS summer program, they are the nominating authority for that. So they're the funnel that chooses a few at the end. I think this year there were 16 people accepted from the US. I don't have the exact number, but I think it's somewhere closer to that, out of the 80 worldwide. So that's a pretty sizable percentage, I think.
Yeah, it's a big percentage for how many actually get funded at the end. Yeah.
I think so, yeah. I think US researchers are very important, and definitely we have 2 liaison offices here in the US, so US collaboration with Japan is actually very important. And then my day-to-day, I make connections. Since I'm the liaison officer, I do a lot of liaising. I meet and connect with lots of different universities and try to get information sessions to happen so that they can find out more, because our job is to increase people's knowledge about JSPS. We want people to conduct research in Japan. That's why we give you money to do that. The purpose of it is to create US to Japan bridges, right? So maybe in the future, you'll have a PI or somebody that you want to send to Japan. Like you're a professor and you have a student. I'm trying to use sciencey terms. I'm not a sciencey person. I studied Japanese in college, so I think that kind of speaks to how I ended up in this position. But so I spend a lot of time making connections with different people and trying to get our information out there. And we also try to make life, because we also receive people from Japan here. And so we try to make JSPS researchers feel comfortable, and we connect with other Japanese researchers who are currently living and working in Japan, in the US, and trying to make sure that they feel comfortable, and how can we create a community. That is a lot of, we have what's called Nihonjin Kenkyusha Koryukai, which is the Japanese researchers gathering, and we have that twice a year to make them feel, not to make them feel, but to allow them to communicate with each other, and we have presentations and talks. This past year we just had presentations, and so everyone had their posters up on the wall, and I was like, this is science, of their own research. And so each country's specific liaison office does something specific in collaboration with headquarters, but our focus is to raise awareness of JSPS fellowships here in the US, as well as down in South America, and sometimes in Canada as well. We've had some Canadian connections in the past.
Cool. Could you talk a little bit, you mentioned that there was also the opposite happening as well with JSPS, with Japanese students coming to the States.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that process, and if there were interested PIs maybe to sponsor students, is there a place they can sign up? Like how can a US-based researcher get the word out if they would like to recruit someone? Right,
yeah, that's a perfect question. So yeah, we definitely have a lot of JSPS, Japan fellows coming to the US to conduct their own research here with, so those are more younger Japanese, more like grad students and postdocs to come. And then we have those two programs, like the Overseas Challenger Fellowship, and that can be found on our website as well, so more information about that. And so basically the first step is for people to know that they can actually have people, but it's that the JSPS Japan Fellow will have to apply. They handle the application because the application is in Japanese, but they'll reach out to them. So a good way to find, just to say, they can probably email me and say, hey, I'm interested in hosting people, and then I'll get in contact with headquarters and say, I have some people who want to host, and then we can move forward from there.
It's really cool. So we'll link in the video description your contact information. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there, for the funding, for those students coming over from Japan to the US, is it similar in terms of what that funding would cover? I'm sure that's for interest in signing up to, like, or is there a resource allocation for experiments in that funding as well? And is it also similar on like the timing, there's short-term, long-term? Like, how does that component work if there's an interested PI wanting to sign up for that?
Yeah, there are different durations of time of each person, and I think the stipend is similar. It's difficult because it's all in yen, and I have a US dollar brain, but for people interested, I believe that there's definitely airfare and research stipend included. I've understood that we've recently increased the amount of stipend that each JSPS fellow receives, especially in the Bay Area, because if anybody knows, living in the Bay Area is one of the most expensive things to do, but we want to make sure that JSPS fellows, especially when they come here, are comfortable. I've met a few, especially because we do the Japanese Researchers Gathering, I've met a few JSPS researchers in the Bay Area, like in Stanford, or collaborating with UC Berkeley, and so we want to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, and it's definitely a decent stipend, enough to live.
And the conference that you just had mentioned, that's twice a year as well for the fellows, is that US based in Japan, or where is that conference?
Right, so that conference is actually located in the Bay Area. The summer one is online, but our winter one is in person in Berkeley, California. So, maybe
cool.
You want to come. California's a little rainy in the winter, but it's not so bad. It's definitely not as cold as it is in DC. I heard you guys got a lot of snow.
Yeah, the California weather is definitely the winner.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm not going back to New Jersey. I love it, but I'm not going back. So I think that if you're interested, you can definitely join. If there's Japanese researchers here in the US, you can join the summer program online. And if you want to fly out in the winter, you're more than welcome to.
That's really exciting. We had a question that you mentioned the importance of bonding people almost to not just the program, but also to the culture and like having this greater appreciation. Are there any experiences that you might help facilitate for students going from the US to Japan to kind of fall in love with the culture outside of the research component? Like, are there programs for the students to, you know, facilitate and like really cement down that connection?
Right, so that's great. So I want to push the summer program right now because that has a 1 week homestay experience. So you're there for 2 months, and 1/8 of that experience you'll be spending in a home with Japanese people. So, you know, living in a, I see somebody who's pretty excited about that right now. But so if you apply, and there's also culture experiences. Oh, and during your stay, you know, you're in the country, so please explore. Like, go off and, you know, talk with your researcher and stuff about that. But like, I don't mean go off, but like, you can travel, you have weekends, you're not working the whole time. You'll be able to experience. And then I forgot to mention, but if you don't receive the JSPS fellowship the first time you apply, you're more than welcome to apply again. There's no penalty. You don't have to wait 4 years or anything like that. Please apply again. We want to see your application. And then also, if you've received, say you received the summer program and you were like, that was great, I love JSPS, let me do it again. You're more than welcome to apply for the short-term program. And then you say, okay, that was great, let me do it again. And then you can apply for standard as well. And then you can apply for long-term as an invitational fellow, you know, 6 years after your PhD. Like, we want people to come back. And then there is also an alumni fellowship for people who are specifically involved in our JSPS alumni communities. We call them alumni associations, and you can find that on our website as well. We definitely, I think it's it's Washington based, and the Washington office actually handles a lot of our alumni collaborations, and just talking to them and say, hey, how was your experience? Can you talk about it with some people? And I tend to do a little bit of that, but Washington, D.C. really prioritizes their alumni collaboration. And so we really want people to receive this multiple times. It's not just a one-time thing, and then once you're an established professor here in the US or wherever you are, you can tell your students, hey, I did this really great thing 30 years ago, it's still going. And we've had people do that. We've had researchers from 1996 and older and younger go over to Japan and then tell their own students about it, and their students have received it. It's almost generational. It's kind of sweet. But JSPS definitely wants to cement that bridge. So please apply for the summer program. And also, once you're in Japan with this fellowship, live your life. I mean, conduct your research, but please experience what Japan has to offer.
It's really exciting to hear you say that you can apply multiple times and almost test the waters with a shorter one and then go back for longer and longer. It's really, really cool because a lot of this place are, you know, there's like a one style grant that you get, and that's kind of the end game of it. Question from the chat is, if you get, let's say, the short-term grant, when you come apply again, can you apply to a different lab? So can you have a different lab experience each time you go back, or is the preference that you're staying with the same lab that you originally started with?
No, you can apply for a different one. So if I received the short-term one, I can't do a short-term again. I have to do standard or beyond. So it gets a little finicky if you want to go backwards. They prefer you go down this way. We have like an arrow pointing this way. Go this way. We want to go this way. We want to start off with you as a baby little grad student in your summer program, and then we want to see you all the way to a professor and Nobel Prize winner. We've had a couple of those, but
that's really cool.
Yeah, so we want to almost walk with you during your scientific career to cement your bridge in your own research, but also with Japan.
And each one of those, like, moving up kind of the style of grant, you can pick a different host researcher to do your work in, and so it's, if there's even something you're interested in and haven't had the opportunity to study, but you find a host researcher, you can join and actually be a really good training opportunity and something you wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think obviously your research proposal is the most important part besides having an actual host researcher, because otherwise you can't apply at all. But so your research proposal is very important, and you'll probably want to stay within your own field. Say I'm a geneticist, I would probably want to study gene expression or something like that. I'm here, so I might as well try. So
Actually, can you talk a little bit about the application process of the materials that are expected for one of these? And you can speak about it broadly. If there's little variances between each one, I'm sure folks can look it up on the website. But you mentioned that we need a host, and then what's next?
Yeah, sure. So you'll need a host researcher, and they'll handle their own application form that will ultimately be submitted to JSPS. If you are a PhD student within graduating 2 years graduation, so 2 years behind, and then 6 years after. If you have, you need clarification, you need to receive something from your university that says, yeah, we're pretty sure she will receive or he will receive his PhD within 2 years. And then you'll also need kind of like your CV, the sort of things that you've done in the past, the sort of research that you do. You'll need to write your research proposal. It's almost like receiving a grant. It's almost the same thing. And then they'll ask you what your Japanese level is, and you can say, not at all, and that will not be held against you. They just want to know, And then those are the main things that you'll want to know. It'll kind of be like putting in your CV, and I've seen the application form, at least on the American side, for receiving a short-term program via the nomination authority. It doesn't seem so long and so difficult. I know that it can be very concerning and scary for people when you're applying, but JSPS doesn't try to talk you out of applying via a very long, scary application. We want you to apply, so once you've given all the information that you can provide, you give that to your host researcher, and your host researcher will fill out the application form in Japanese and submit it to Japan headquarters.
Nice. Speaking of long and scary, what is the time frame for something like this? Are these rolling applications where you're constantly getting applications throughout the year? Are there specific deadlines? And if there are, where can people find that?
Okay, perfect. So you can find application deadlines right around the fellowship specifically that you're looking for. We're right now, so Japan's fiscal year starts in April. So right now we don't have a lot of applications open, but for short term, our next application deadline is June 7th, 2024. So you actually have quite a bit of time. If you're hearing this now, you have a bit of time to meet a JSP, I'm so sorry. You have some time to meet a host researcher and connect with them. You should probably be able to finish your application within the 3 months. And I should note that JSPS's deadlines don't necessarily align with the host researcher's deadline. The host institution has their own deadline for submitting their applications to JSPS headquarters. So, for example, with the June 7th deadline that I've just given you, it might be a month in advance that you and your host researcher have to submit your application to the host institution, and they will then submit it to JSPS headquarters.
This is a very good point, just having the communication up front.
Oh, very important.
Yeah, with the professor that would be sponsoring you, what their institutional rules are, because you don't govern that. Like, you
No.
all have your deadline, but that's independent of any institution, and
Right.
they can be very different between different places.
For sure. And then for standard and invitational short term, we have a deadline of April 24 or 26, something like that, 2024. But we also have multiple application periods during a year.
Okay.
So for short-term postdoc, which is our most popular, maybe, because it's so flexible within the time and it's not such a long commitment, it could be anywhere from 1 month to a year. I believe that we have 3 rounds of application in a year. So you just heard about one. In April, they'll announce the rest of them until 2025. So you'll hear about them then. And then for standard and short term, for they have 2 rounds each year. So there are multiple opportunities. So if you miss one, you don't have to worry. It's not going to affect so much. But you want to be thinking in your head, okay, I want to hit this deadline because I want to be in Japan from this time to this time. Each application round has a different time of ending up in Japan. And you have to enter within a certain window. But after you're there, then it starts. It's not you have to get there and get out in a certain time. It's you have to arrive there within this window, and then you leave when your tenure is up, whatever, and you're able to decide that based on your application. You tell them, I want to be there for 2 months. I want to be there for 7 months. I think that I have this much research to be done, and I can do that within 7 months.
That's really cool that there's this window provided, so you don't have to be on X date, but like, I need to finish something back at home, and then but you have this window to start, and then you can go and have the full time there.
Right, for sure.
I have some logistical questions about that. So for both long and short term, people were wondering, what do I do about health insurance? Let's say if I like medical needs to ensure that they can stay safe and healthy. And then for the longer stays, the same question, but also, do you ever have family members of the folks who are coming out join them?
Yeah, so I think that you are, the living stipend should be pretty good for health insurance, and I think definitely is more of a question for your university, your host institution university. I'm sure that they have something for visiting scholars, or are able to help you out in that instance. And then we do not provide specific funding for people for like family care or something like that, but you're more than welcome to bring them with you.
So if you wanted to have your husband, your wife, or if any significant other kids, as long as you cover it, it's not like they can't come in.
Right, yeah, they can come with you for
Cool.
sure.
And the health insurance question, so it's just so different between the two countries as well.
Yeah.
That this, people get nervous about that.
No, of course I understand.
Yeah. In continuing with some of those themes, can you give us like a rough estimate of in each of these different time points for the application process, if folks are interested, roughly how many can be expected to be awarded with these different programs, or even just like a collective number of short and long-term fellows that receive this funding?
Yeah, got it. So worldwide, each year I think there are about 160 slots from postdoctoral short-term. Standard, there are 330 slots. For short-term invitational, which is the higher for professors or researchers in that way, that's 160. And then there are 60. We just went up. We have 60 slots for invitational fellowships that are long-term. So each of these information can be found. So if you go to JSPS headquarters website, you'll see something that says sort of like fellowships, and then you can look for inviting researchers from abroad to Japan. And then you can go and you'll find short-term, you'll find summer program, you'll find long-term and standard and all of those programs that I've been talking about so far. And once you click on any one of those, you'll see a drop-down menu on the left-hand side, and that will tell you, you can find out people who have already received alumni-based, even people who have just received and are there now actually. So they'll say per round how many people received it. So you can do your own calculations. I know you guys are all scientists and you love to do it. So you can do your own calculations about how many people receive how many a year from even which field, humanities, sciences, all that. You see how many applications have been from each, and you can also find more information about the guidelines and the deadlines and any questions you might have. There's frequently asked questions, and so the website's a really good. It's better than me at explaining all of this, but it can't talk. So definitely check it out if you can, and that'll answer a lot of your questions. But I'm also definitely available for anybody's questions if they need.
Another question that folks have is about the networking opportunities with other fellows. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to connect with others, how easy is that, and does JSPS do anything to facilitate something like that?
So we don't do anything to facilitate that. That is more, if you can find them, then you can connect with them. But we'll definitely say the names of who received, what their research topic is, and we have the internet now. So you can easily look it up and
So you
find.
have access to the list and contact info. It'd be really easy to connect with others who are already there.
So we don't put out contact information just for security's sake, but you can find their name, and I'm sure that they have a LinkedIn or something. We, JSPS San Francisco office really loves LinkedIn. So you can find a lot of our alumni on there if they've connected with us. But you can also find those alumni communities like I'm talking about is a really good place. So after you've come back from Japan, you're able to connect with people that have either just done it or have done a JSPS fellowship 20 years in the past. It's up to you, but I really recommend joining an alumni association because then you also get special access to what we call the Bridge Alumni Fellowship, and it's only for people who have already received a JSPS fellowship.
So it's one of those follow-up ones that we talked about.
Yeah.
It's really cool. We have a question from the chat. Can you talk about maybe one of the most rewarding components of being able to award these fellowships, like a story where you saw someone like become really successful from it, or kind of like you were alluding to, like even Nobel Prize winners. Like, what is like a really nice story from that?
So I'm pretty new. I've only been a liaison officer going on my 3rd year. So I started in April, the beginning of the fiscal year. But so I've actually helped somebody from Manoa. They had a lot of questions. So they first found out about JSPS because we did a information session with Manoa, University of Hawaii Manoa. And they heard about JSPS, and then they started emailing me like monthly. They were like, hey, just checking in. What am I doing? How do I do this? And I was like, okay. And I just heard maybe a few months back that they received their fellowship, and they're over there now. I've heard of a lot of alumni as I've been talking. I do a lot of communication with our alumni as well, and they have their professors and they send their own JSP. So I wasn't just like being facetious or anything like that, or just making up stories. Like I've actually had professors send their own alumni, send their own students to Japan with one of these JSPS. They were like, please apply. You would do really well, and then they received it, and then they went, and they've also received people from Japan in their own lab and conducted research with them from Japan. So it's just an amazing connection that's built over years, and I think it's really amazing. And for me, it's just really, I want people to be able to, one, go to Japan, because it's such an amazing country. I'm totally biased, but I think that the culture and connection that can be made there, especially in the research fields, Japan has a really amazing biomedical field. My boss, Director Nakabapu, is actually a 25-year, he's retired now, but he worked in gene expression and that sort of thing. I've heard him talk, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not a scientist, so I don't always understand what he's saying, but I think that, he did amazing research, and here now, people have been, he does talks around the States, and professors have been like, thank you for your work, and I think that the culture aspect of Japan, the US can learn a lot from, and we can exchange so many new ideas, and the collaboration aspect is really important, I think, and there's also lots of seismology happening in Japan because it's on fault lines and they have so many different weather things happening with them all the time. And I think just the different fields that can be looked at and the collaboration that can happen between the US and Japan is just incredible, and we need to really utilize that.
It's a really beautiful way, I think, of rounding it out. Abby, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else that you would like to tell folks about that maybe we didn't cover, or maybe final contact info?
Yeah, you can reach me at abby@overseas.jsps.go.jp. That's a lot of dots, but I'm sure it'll be in the chat. We'll put it in later. And if you have any questions at all, you can email me for sure. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to tell you more about JSPS, even though I talked your ear off for I don't even know how long. I don't have a watch. But I really want you to apply for JSPS. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid. If you think that this is something that, you know, even you were like, maybe I kind of want to go to Japan, do it. Apply for a JSPS fellowship, and we'd love to see you there, and I'd love to help you get there.